Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today.
Hello, and welcome. My guest this month is a theatre director who has been at the heart of new writing in the UK for the past 40 years. His range is extraordinary, from experimental work in studio spaces to directing Hollywood A-listers in London's West End. His time as artistic director of the Bush Theatre in the 1970s and 80s was a golden period for the West London hotbed of theatrical creativity. And when he was artistic director of Theatre Royal Plymouth, he nurtured and supported a generation of theatre makers, including us, the Idiots, Frantic Assembly, and Sean Dale Jones. He remains curious, and it is always a pleasure to chew the theatrical fat with him over a glass of wine. So I welcome my dear friend, Simon Stokes.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here, Paul.
You're very welcome, Simon. I always say this when I have a director as a guest. I'm always intrigued by how much acting the director in question might have done in the past. Now, I noticed, I don't know if you've ever talked about this, but I noticed that you trained at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School.
I did.
My first question is, what course did you take or study there, Simon?
I took two courses. The first was a stage management course, a very, very good 1-year course. And the second was a director's course, also 1 year.
Ah, okay, that's interesting. I will come back to the notion of acting and your experience of acting during the podcast. But I'm also intrigued, just to start us off on this, am I right in thinking that for a while, one of the main routes into directing was through stage management? Is that how some directors became directors?
Well, I did deliberately because I didn't know how things worked, which is why I went to the Old Vic School. Nowadays, there's lots of assistant directors. That job did not exist back in the day. So, yes, people came in. They came in sometimes via stage management, more often via acting, even more often via Oxbridge.
Of course. Some things never change, Simon.
Exactly.
Now, we'll touch on that later, but I always like to go right back to the beginning. So don't worry if I'm not looking for exact memories. I'm just curious as to your very early experiences of theatre. Was that something at school or with your family, or when did you first encounter it, and what might it have been?
Well, Paul, in some ways, I was born into it.
Oh.
That's because you say theatre, not a theatre. And my father was a padre. And a padre is a priest in the military, the army in his case. So there were already two branches of theatre immediately thrust upon me. One was the army and one was the church. And so I grew up with all of that ritual and costume and campness. And of course, I was behind the scenes throughout, often behind the scenes. In the church, for instance, I used to sing in the choir in whichever place we were. And therefore, we were part of the cast, so to speak. And it was also at a time of history, this is back in the 50s, 60s, really, where things were moving fast and very dramatically. So my father we were going around the world closing the empire, basically. And there was a lot going on and a lot of weirdness happening.
That's very interesting. And that's a fantastic phrase. It will definitely stick with me. It was we were going around the world closing the empire. On one level, sounds like you were closing branches of W.H. Smith's or Woolworths.
Well, it sort of was a bit like that, I must say. We were in Kenya twice,
wow.
And the second time it was independence there. We were in Tripoli in Libya twice, and the British Army got out of that the second time. So my father was consecrating the churches as well, or handing them over to whoever, the locals. And in Berlin, where we were, it was the Russians who were trying to close us down.
Wow. It's interesting when you say, I remember a very early play that I did. It might not have been a full production. It might have been like a workshop production of a play at the old Soho Poly. Remember the old Soho?
Yeah, indeed.
and it was a play called Missing the Boat, and it was about a family getting out of Aden.
Yes.
And you suddenly reminded me of it. I remember that thinking, oh, it's quite a fascinating play. So when you were, I suppose, moving around, I mean, I'm assuming perhaps you didn't go to school in those places. You were at school in England, I'm assuming, or maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I was at school in the north of England.
Yeah.
Yes, from the age of 8.
And did you encounter theatre in some form at the school?
Well, they did plays, and I was in them.
Okay.
The main place I encountered, my early part of theatre was actually from my mother, who was a keen amateur. But also in all of these places around the world, she would every year do a nativity play, quite a big production in the church with choirs, and this was the days of national service, so you could get some, very bright, very talented people who basically had to do it because they were told to do it. They volunteered theoretically. And you could get a lot of, we had the Royal Chorus signals doing the communications and all of that kind of stuff. So that was my first, I think in Catholic camp, I must have been 6 or something when I first saw my mother's nativity play, and it went on for 2 decades, probably more than that. I didn't really go to a theatre that I can recall until I was probably late teens, rep in Colchester, where we ended up, because...
what did you see?
Oh, God knows, rep stuff. When I was, I guess, 18, I made a journey down from the north to see Hair, the production of Hair, which opened, I think, in something like 67. You won't recall. You're way too young for. The Lord Chamberlain's office was abolished, and therefore censorship in the theatre was abolished. And it's very weird to think that there was such a thing. But every time you put a play on, you had to submit the play to the Lord Chamberlain's office. And if they didn't like, what was in it, swearing or nudity, they would just say, no, you can't do that. They'd cross it out and send it back. Very, very strange and relatively recent in our history. And the day after that was abolished, Hair opened in the West End coming from New York. And it was, a fantastic and eye-opening thing. I guess I went 3 months after it was open. And of course, it had famously nudity in it, which for those days was, amazing and shocking. And it had great songs, and it was a hippie musical and of its time. And it was very, very different from anything I saw at Colchester Rep.
Am I right in thinking, I might have got this wrong, but that Kenneth Tynan was involved in some way with Hair, or have I got that wrong, or did he just review it?
That rings a slight bell. He was, I think, later on perhaps, or maybe even at the time, he was obviously dramaturg at, I think it was later on at the National Theatre under Olivier.
Yes,
but he was, of course, the great critic, wasn't he?
Exactly. So that's interesting. So you must have been not must have been, but by the time you reached that age of 18 and you were travelling down to London to see Hair, was theatre becoming something where you thought, oh, maybe I could do this professionally? When did you go to university? How did that?
Yes, it is something I wanted to do, but I was too stupid to get into university via A-levels and so on.
I don't believe that's so.
But on the other hand, I was clever enough to get into Oxford, because you didn't have to do A-levels, you just have to go for a chat. It's a bit like this, Paul. But I didn't like it there at all. So I left it after a year. I was reading modern history. Modern history started with the Roman. I didn't really like it because it was a very, old-fashioned place with people I didn't much care for. So I stopped going there and decided to go to drama school to do stage management, as we've discussed. But yes, I wanted to be a director.
And obviously you'd seen Hair. At that stage when you decided to not continue at Oxford and pursue this notion of becoming a director, were there directors whose work you'd seen or you admired at that stage or not?
No, but now you mention it, what I was doing, I was reading... Penguin had this series of new plays of the late 50s, 60s, really. And that was quite a revolutionary time. Waiting for Godot, which was a great revolutionary play, was directed, you may remember by, or you won't remember, but you may know, by Peter Hall in the West End at the Arts.
Yes.
But there were all sorts of writers. So I was reading all of those. They published anthologies, so you had about 4 writers to a copy, and then it was a whole series. So I was quite familiar with what was going on and what the influences were from France, for instance, and other places. The place where things weren't happening was America, weirdly. Europe was, abuzz with all sorts of creativity and all sorts of politics.
I suppose as well, when you said, largely for your childhood, but certainly as you were growing up, a period of big dramatic change happening, very fast.
Exactly.
And, I think everyone thinks, I suppose, of the late 60s and Paris in 68 and all of that kind of stuff that was going on. Were you always drawn to new writing? Because I think of you as someone who's fascinated by new theatre and new voices. Was this something that was there at the beginning? Was it never going to be Shakespeare or the classics? It was always new work?
Well, it was, but not quite as narrowly as that. I was living in a time, the greatest cultural influence was the Beatles. And they started in, 62?
Yes.
With Love Me Do, Please Please Me.
Yeah.
And if you go all the way through to, I don't know, Sgt. Pepper and then the White Album, the amount of change creatively that they were mirroring was extraordinary. Technical change, but also the way in which generations were shifting, the way in which people looked at things. And that was happening sort of everywhere. They were just an early indication of that. And the world was changing, and to be young at that time had the possibility of being independent. Nobody really bothered about, getting on the housing ladder or anything, like that. I mean, these were not concerns. I mean, I lived on nothing. I lived all my life like a student, frankly. And it's, because there were things to do. There was ideas to get your head around. So it was really part of that. And the old plays were, of course, old plays, there's wonderful old plays, but in my head and in other people's head, they were part of an older pre-World War generation. That generation was exhausted and wanted a quiet life, quite rightly, as you can imagine. But and they wanted everything, calm and each thing in its place. And we didn't want that.
You're absolutely right. And the impact that the Beatles had through that decade of the 60s, charting that via their albums and how they changed and everything. And we'll come to more specific works in a moment, but I'm interested to find yourself at Bristol Old Theatre School. And my previous guest last month was another director of a different generation, Justin Audebert, who's now, as you know, taken over at Chichester. And I was asking him about his training. He did a course in directing at Birkbeck. And I'm just curious what your training was like. So what was was it very rooted in psychological realism and Stanislavski? What was the training like then?
No, it was mostly stage management. I mean, first of all, the stage management training was very good.
Yeah.
And it was a great year, and I learned all about all the things you have to learn: lighting, sound, flying, how to sweep a floor, all that kind of stuff, and how actors were going to treat you all your life. But the director's course actually was made up mostly of telling directors how to deal with the technicalities of theatre, which was useful if you'd just come from Oxford. Wasn't useful to me because I'd already done it. So I got to go out and direct tours in the West Country.
Ah, I see. So these were small shows that were travelling around in a van, that sort of thing?
No, only enough I did that. That's how I got my equity card, which you had to have in those days. Travelling with Brian Way's Theatre Centre in a van, as you say, 4 people.
Of course. Yeah.
2 shows a day around the villages of Cornwall and all the way going up to Warwickshire, I think. And that was fantastic. 3 months education. But and this was sort of like that, but obviously with students and drama school at Bristol with students, and we were doing it for like a week or something.
And then, So when you come out of Bristol, so you've done your directing and stage management training, what was the next move?
Quite. The next move coming out of Bristol, I went to be an ASM for very short periods of time. I went to what was then called the 69 Theatre Company, COOIR.
Became the
Royal Exchange in Manchester.
Became the Manchester Royal Exchange.
Yes, and it had the mock-up of the auditorium as it is now. They built a full-size mock-up there, and we were doing shows in the cathedral. I remember, for instance, Man for All Seasons. I was there for 2 shows. Man for All Seasons. Bob Hoskins was the common man.
Wow. Wow.
Yes. And then I went and did, again, a short burst. Before that, I think I had been a forest spot operator at Manchester Library. And they had 2 theatres there, the library and the one out on the edge of town. Can't remember what it's called. And I think
Contact.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. No, it was an auditorium. Anyway, and I shone a forest spot on the 2 leads of a musical, spoof musical, one being My New Wife, Teresa Stretfield, and the other being Alan Rickman.
Wow.
Just out of RADA.
Wow.
I know.
Of course, I have to ask you, the 2 male actors you mentioned there. Now, I was never fortunate enough to see Bob Hoskins on stage, but I think on screen and TV, he certainly for me was an amazing performer in 3 things that stick in my mind. One, the BBC Pennies from Heaven, Dennis Potter, in which he was superb. And then, of course, later in The Long Good Friday and Mona Lisa.
Yeah, fantastic.
When you see someone, presumably he was relatively not starting out, but I wonder what point of his career was he at?
Well, he was getting the bar of the common man, so he was at the Royal Exchange, so he was something. James Maxwell was playing the lead there. So, I remember seeing him.
Who directed it?
Casper Vrede, also one of the artistic directors there.
Okay.
Swedish.
Go back to your memory about Bob Hoskins.
Okay, I first saw Bob Hoskins when I was at drama school in the Bristol Vic studio, the new studio, and because he was part of Ken Campbell's troupe.
Wow, of course he was. Yes, yeah.
It was absolutely fantastic. Driving a 6-inch nail up your nose, all of those things, and Bobby's strong arm stuff. You wrap a big rope round your neck, and you have a member of the audience at each end pulling it. Those things I used to do. It was a brilliant show, and that's where I first came across Bob.
It's interesting when you mention a theatre of change and a reaction to what went before, of which things like Ken Campbell is very much part of that. It's not
absolutely
necessarily just a writer sitting and writing a play.
Yes,
but the world of things like the People's Show and Ken Campbell. Presumably you were obviously being exposed to that kind of work as well.
Yes, and later on I was working with those people at the Bush. But it's worth remembering the People's Show, as I try to remember every day, because I'm sure you will, being a student of theatre history, know that they were the first fringe company in this country.
Yeah.
But it goes back a while. I think 1966 they played at Better Books, didn't they, in Charing Cross Road? And obviously, as you know, they're still playing. And one of their founders, Mark Long, is still leading the company.
I think their kind of relentless pursuit of the wild, the crazy, the anarchic, and often the profound.
Oh, brilliant.
So inspirational.
Brilliant company.
So how did you end up getting the job at the Bush? Because that's quite a prestigious gig, to get that.
Well, it wasn't then.
Oh, really? At that point, it wasn't?
No. No, because when I went there, Fringe Theatre barely existed. There were a couple, I think, of theatres, pub theatres. There was us and the King's Head, and I think maybe the Orange Tree. That was it. So this kind of area of, and we were kind of terribly scorned by the theatrical establishment. I remember an equity councillor calling us grubby thrusters, which I thought was rather good.
That's brilliant. I hope you owned that side.
Well, so it was, it wasn't at all a because the Bush wasn't in that sense the Bush. It had been going 2 years, less than 2 years probably when I got there.
What year did you get there, Simon?
75.
Okay.
Yeah, so, there wasn't really much. Things were just beginning in the city. It was the landscape was very different to what it is now. I got it in a time-honored manner. When I was at the 69 Theatre Company, now the Royal Exchange, there was a woman who was doing the marketing, I think, there, and she ended up down in London helping out the Bush, and they never had a stage manager. And they wanted one because they were taking a Stephen Polyarkov play to the Edinburgh Festival, and they wanted somebody who would build the set and, figure out sound and lighting and all of that. So she called me up and said, would I do that? And I had nothing else on. So I said yes. And the reason that, this wasn't a highly sought after job is that nobody got paid much. I mean, when I got there with £18 a week, I think, in the days when £18 would buy you something. So, I went and stayed, and as a stage manager, I went to Edinburgh. Polyarkov was just leaving to become the first writer in residence at the National Theatre, very young.
Yeah.
And he wrote us a farewell play called City Sugar, which actually went to the West End in a not very good transfer. And then I stayed. And then the management that was there was two of them, and they hated each other. They hated each other so much, there wasn't a career in it anyway, let's face it, at these levels of, money and so on. I think we began to get an Arts Council grant in the first year of £4,000 or something. But, and they made a pact that they would leave if the other left, which they then did. And I said, oh, well, I'll do that then. And I did.
Wow.
We had a guy who'd also left Oxford, very good guy, who came in and knew about sums and became the business manager, and he was very good. And the Bush got incorporated into a company with an accountant and lawyers and all of that. And we brought in, Dusty Hughes was brought in, who was at that time a literary critic at Time Out.
And he came as your kind of literary manager?
No. He came as the artistic director. So the three of us ran it.
Oh.
All the time I was there, we had three artistic directors.
That's interesting, of course, because we've told by Idiot, we started with three artistic directors.
Yeah.
And for 20 odd years, we were like that. And I really look back on that formative period of time for us. I think we benefited hugely from free imaginations. I really do.
I agree completely.
That dynamic, if it works, is a brilliant one.
Yes, and three is a good number because, you need a vote so you can get two against one. I mean, one of the most successful and, revolutionary theatres of that time was the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow, doing this, very high concept European style theatre in the Gorbals of all places.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. And they have three artistic directors. One was a director, one was a designer, one was a writer.
Yeah.
And they were a great role model, I thought, for us in those terms.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
This might be too difficult to answer because obviously you supported, nurtured, developed some extraordinary writers, I'm sure, during that period of time. I have two questions, really. I'm not going to pin you down to one particular production. That would be impossible. But what were the writers that you most enjoyed working with during your time at the Bush?
That is an impossible question because they were very different.
Of course.
And they represented different plays in different ways, a huge variety. I mean, and that was the great secret, that we were all determined to do the best play, to have in the best company, rather than the best play like this. You know what I mean? The style was not dominating.
Yeah.
What was dominating was talent.
Yeah.
And that's always, for me, been the key.
Yeah.
The writer I think I, most enjoyed possibly working with Snow Wilson.
Wow.
Remember Snow?
Yes.
Who died terribly prematurely just 10 years ago. He was, extraordinary talent, very underrated now, but and a co-founder of Portable Theatre, of course, one of the very early new writing companies. And he was a polymath, a great guy, beekeeper. But there were many, many, many. And of course, we were taking on new writers all the time. Kevin Elliott was an actor.
Yeah.
Alas, also now dead, but very good actor, and he was in one of my early plays, and we gave him his first commission as a writer. And he became, obviously, with My Night in Reg, with Reg and all of that, very, very well known as a writer. But there were not writers like that.
But I suppose also, I mean, we're going to move to actors and the director's relationship with the actor shortly, Simon. Before we do that, we're going to go to our item that we have each month, which is Ask an Idiot.
Hello, my name is Colin Gleeson, and I'd like to ask Simon what was the biggest professional risk he's ever taken, and did it pay off?
Great question. Over to you, Simon.
It is a great question because, apart from anything else, the idea of risk, you're working in new plays, it's all a risk, isn't it? Because that is part of the point. And you've obviously got to guard against piling risk on risk on risk. The risk is taken with the original choices. I think so that, I mean, I've taken lots and lots of different kinds of risks in my time. I'm going to pick one. After I'd worked at the Bush, as I was saying earlier, really started from very little. They'd had some success, but very little. And we moved that. I was there for 12 years, and the Bush became something of a national and even international success. And it started in a very unpromising place in Shepherd's Bush on the corner of Goldhawk Road. And Goldhawk Road was a pretty rough place in those days, and Shepherd's Bush Green also was pretty rough. So it wasn't a delightful middle-class enclave of any kind. So we did all that, and I left there in the late 80s and worked abroad in different countries. And I had offers. I had an offer to go and run a strand at the Nationals from Peter Hall. He wanted me to do that. BBC wanted me to become a drama producer and bring my contacts there. And I didn't really want to do those things, partially because I was knackered, run the Bush. But I went into a venture, apart from freelancing, I was in a venture with Howard Panter, who eventually founded ATG, where I worked with him to bring new plays into the West End, into commercial theatre, which possibly wasn't the best idea in the world, because you spend all the time not so much finding the new plays, but finding the star who is going to hold the new play up, which is not a very edifying way to go about things, but nevertheless is necessary. And there was a recession also going on in the 90s. So and it was Howard who said to me at some point, they need someone like you in a place called Plymouth. And I said, okay. And I went down to meet Adrian Vinkin. I can't remember what the job title was, creative producer or something like that. And eventually, once I'd got the job, I said, nobody understands what that is. I'm going to be called artistic director if you don't mind. They had money because they had a big commercial concern going on the large stage. So I went there. I chose to go there because I wanted to, it was a sort of sociological experiment. I wanted to see if you could do plays such as you and I do, new plays, and make them work anywhere. Or did it have to be in, the flesh pots of London or in Birmingham or Manchester? Plymouth had absolutely no history of this kind of creative speciality. But it had a very good theatre, the drum theatre, studio theatre, which you know well. And I thought, well, it should be possible. And if it is not possible, we're all damned, aren't we? In the end, because, we're going to have to go where the living is easy. So I went there and I applied the various rules and methods that I have for programming. And the mix of programming, which is fundamentally to do your own plays, to have visiting companies who will sign up for a period of time for at least a week, because companies were coming, but it was all 1 day or 2 days. Nobody could ever make any sense of what was on and what was coming next. And the implication was, and if you come, you have to come next year because you've got to build an audience. It's not me building an audience for you. You've got to build your audience as well. And then we started going into co-production, It's about talent spotting, but it's also about commitment to the talent. It's about being as generous as you can be. Not just, we weren't generous with the money at all, as you may ruefully remember, but we were generous certainly with time and alcohol and the chat and all of that kind of stuff. And we were fairly generous in not looking to see what this play was, but what the run of plays was going to be. What's the play, the one after next, going to be like? So that we would have the benefit also of that development. Mind you, that's a question of spotting the talent first.
I can only obviously speak for myself and Told by Idiot, but I am very, very glad you took that risk, Simon, because I think, the way in which you certainly supported us, and not just us. I've had this conversation with Scott and Steve at Frantic. In fact, I remember we were desperate searching for a new partner, and Scott and Stephen said, you should talk to Simon at Plymouth, because he's really, really supportive of all types of new work. And I think that is a big risk, but I think you gave a platform there. As you say, it's not just about a financial commitment. It's about being able to ring you and chat and talk. And I'm very, very glad that you did that. I've got one final question before I do my quick fire questions, because it's been so lovely. I could talk to you all day, but we'll do that in our own time.
Yes.
Obviously, you've mentioned actors who have gone on to be incredibly successful, like Bob Hoskins and Alan Rickman. I'm just curious, particularly, I suppose, during your Harold Panther days, what was it like when you're directing not only big actors, but actors who maybe have very contrasting backgrounds? I'm obviously thinking of John Malkovich and Juliet Stevenson here that you directed. And I'm curious because for me, they see the polar opposite.
I didn't direct Juliet Stevenson.
But you did John Malkovich.
I did direct John. Yes, very different backgrounds, very different outlooks. And the thing I think I would say mostly, and this is not just about actors, but people should never underestimate cultural difference, because everybody thinks they know what it's like, but in different countries it ain't like that. The approach is different. And the obvious difference is that in America, Britain has grown up via the written word very often. I know people like you are the engines of change, and that has happened over quite a long while now. But we're famous, since Shakespeare's time from the written world. America is fundamentally a spoken world country. They have great writers, of course, but I think from the early days, the speaking and the listening, more akin to somewhere like South Africa, the Zulus, for instance, who never wrote anything down, but it was all passed down. So there are differences. I think the thing that you have to understand about celebrities, in fairness, is that they are carrying the weight on their shoulders. They have got it all to lose and not much to gain. Everybody else is not in that circumstance. Nearly everybody else has got something to gain and not much to lose. So when you look at it like that, you have a great deal more respect for how they need it to work for themselves, for the company, and a good leading actor will lead the company, which John did magnificently. And they have foibles because they have their own experience. They have a lot on their plate. All the marketing is on them. They have a reputational damage to stare in the face. And that's, I think, what you have to be very well aware of, which I wasn't actually at the time, but I was made aware of it.
That's fascinating. Simon, I'm going to finish like I always do with 8 rapid-fire questions. You just say the first response that comes into your head. Peter Brook or Peter Hall?
Peter Brook.
Harold Pinter or Sam Shepard?
Sam Shepard.
Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay?
Oh, Sauvignon Blanc.
Biarritz or Cadaqués?
I don't know where the second place is, so I'll go Biarritz.
Cadaqués is where Salvador Dali was born. You should go, but
okay.
After you've been to Biarritz. Tracy Emin or Paula Rego?
Tracy Emin.
A Clockwork Orange or Lindsay Anderson's If?
Clockwork Orange.
Jam roly-poly or apple pie?
Oh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I think I'll go apple pie.
Pros Arch or Theatre in the Round?
Depends on the play.
Of course it does. It's a ridiculous question. I came up with a very tough one with the jam roly-poly or apple pie, and then I finished with a ludicrous question. Apologies. Simon, it's been really lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time And also, it's brilliant to get an insight into different periods of time as well, just socially and creatively. It's been really fascinating. And we'll meet for one of our regular glasses of Sauvignon Blanc very soon.
That will be a great pleasure, and this has been a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. All the best. Take care.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please spread the word